Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Ibarra. I'm the Artistic Director here at Baltimore Center Stage, and I'm so grateful you're joining us for the 19th Whose Vote Is It Anyway? This event was curated by some of my favorite artists in the American theater, Madeline, Sayet, Paige, Hernandez, and Nicole Watson. And while we're all disappointed we can't bring this event to you in person, we couldn't be more thrilled to continue connecting to you, our audiences, our community, and our friends. Tonight, on the eve of the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, against the backdrop of a global pandemic and national uprising against racial injustice, we wanted to really interrogate this anniversary, to hold up the incredible accomplishment of the suffrage movement while acknowledging and making visible those who were erased and excluded from it. Now, as with most complex questions in life, our artists and their art help shed new light on the biggest questions of our world. In that spirit, Maddie, Paige, and Nicole have pulled together a kind of mosaic or a prismatic look at suffrage, refracted through a mix of stories, scholarship, poetry, and music from across time to help us reflect on this moment in history and how it may inform our future. You'll hear from a multiplicity of voices calling in an expansive understanding of suffrage. We'll, of course, hear the familiar words of Fannie Lou Hamer performed by the incomparable Dawn Ursula. Historian and member of the Piscataway Nation, Gabrielle Tyack, is here with us too to share a bit about suffrage in the context of the lives of Indigenous women. Tonight, you'll also hear the poetry of Puerto Rican artist and activist Julia de Burgos, original music from Baltimore-based composer Melissa Lee, thoughts from Baltimore's young, current, and future voters, and so much more. I can't wait for you to experience this, so I'll get on with it. The 19th, Whose Vote Is It Anyway, is brought to you as part of our ongoing civic programming, through which we catalyze conversation and civic participation through art. This event is free of charge and is being supported entirely through individual donations of $5, $10, $50, and more. If you have the capacity to chip in, we'd so appreciate it. Your support will help ensure that Baltimore Center Stage will indeed remain open for storytelling. Now, on behalf of the staff and board of Baltimore Center Stage, thank you for being here and enjoy the show.
It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Ruleville, we was held up by the city police and state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day for driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Ruleville, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children, who told me that the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down and tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. Before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, "Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I mean that." He said, "If you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave." Said, "Then if you go down and withdraw," said, "you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi." And I addressed him and told him and said, I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Rouville, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom. 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw that they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said, it was a state highway patrolman and chief of police ordered us out. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 5 people in the highway patrolman's car. I stepped off of the bus to see what was happening, and somebody screamed from in the car that the 5 workers was in and said, "Get that one there." When I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some people in the booking room and began to place us in cells. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman. And he asked me where I was from. I told him Rouville. And he said, "We're going to check that." I left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You are from Rouville, all right." And he used a curse word. He said, "We are going to make you wish you was dead." I was carried out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders from the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on the bunk bed on my face. I laid on my face, and the first Negro began to beat. I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted. I was holding my hands behind me at that time on my left side because I suffered from polio when I was 6 years old. After the first Negro had beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro who had beat me to sit on my feet to keep me from working my feet. I began to scream. And one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and tell me to hush. One white man, my dress had worked up high. He walked over and pulled my dress. I pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. I was in jail when Medgar Evers was murdered. All of this is on account that we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily? because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. We are 99 voices sounding, 99 hearts are pounding, 99, let me break it down and rise up, rise up. You are 99% surrounded, brothers strong and sisters grounded, 99 real and 99 now. No, we won't bow down, no, we won't bow down. Come on, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. Under pressure, we crack, we rise up and we take it back. Oh, which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Yes, that's right, get a little bit louder. Walk, can't hear you a little bit louder. Take it back, get up, get down. There's a revolution in this town. They held me down and they shot me down. They locked me out when I'm down and out. Got nothing to lose and got nothing to prove, so you're damn sure gonna hear me shout. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world.
Give you greetings in this time of green corn, the height of the feminine energy of the cycle of our traditional Piscataway year. My name is Gabrielle Tyack, and I'm a Piscataway historian. When you think about what happened 100 years ago in 1920, the suffrage movement, when white women particularly were able to secure voting rights, it was also a time of darkness for many of our peoples, and actually a time of emergence as well, one where we started to assert our own governance structures again after a long period of time. For our people, as with many Native people, the American project actually brought a swift and extreme decline of our power as women, power that we had held for centuries, for millennia, prior to the invasion of our country. Today in particular, I would like to bring forward a woman named Nansanan. She was the last traditional chief to stay within our homelands and address and make suit against the provincial authorities. Around 1707, a constable robbed the grave of her daughter. And Nansanan, our last traditional chief, down at Chaptico, right around the same place where the mission church was established by the Jesuits, where our people still go today. She made a claim for her rights. She made a claim for the rights of the dead, for the authority that she had over the land. This case was not resolved until 1712, and our people stayed in that exact place all the way till today. And like our Haudenosaunee sisters to the north, we have been seeking a restoration of our rights. That is suffrage. It's not new. And I hope you take some moments today to say her name, Nansanan, Nansanan, Nansanan. We thank you. We honor you. We keep your spirit for the rights of women living today, women as the backbone of the community for all people. That I send my greetings and blessings and thanks as you make this journey through time. Take some time to thank the river, thank the waters, go out, breathe the air, understand that we're all part of Mother Earth.
The women, more power to the women.
Hi, my name is Savannah Wood. I am an artist and the archives director for the 128-year-old Afro-American newspapers. I'm also the executive director of Afro Charities, which is a nonprofit partner to the Afro that produces artistic, educational, and direct aid programs, often informed by the Afro's rich archives. I'm so honored to be part of this event tonight and really want to thank everybody at Center Stage for putting this together. In April, the Afro and Afro Charities published a book called To the Front, Black Women and the Vote, which is here, which celebrates Black women suffragists who spent significant portions of their lives in DC and Maryland, as well as some of their 21st century counterparts. Several writers contributed to this project, which provides lots of threads for curious readers to pull on if they want to learn more about local Black women who were involved in this movement. And while our book is meant to uplift the names of several women involved in the movement, we also make note of the fact that the 19th Amendment was not a huge success for the majority of Black women. The 1848 Seneca Falls Convention is largely understood as the start of the women's suffrage movement in the U.S. many of the women involved and present, who were all white, were prominent abolitionists, so you might assume that they were also in favor of universal suffrage. But in 1870, when black men won the vote before white women suffragists were pissed. And in pleading her case and complaining about the passage of the 15th Amendment, Susan B. Anthony evoked racist stereotypes to illustrate the absurdity that black men would be able to vote before her. As time went on, race relations didn't get much better. Black women who wanted to join white suffrage clubs were often rebuked because of their race. In 1913, when Alice Paul organized the famous Women's Suffrage Parade in D.C., black women were asked to march in a segregated unit at the very back of the procession. There are differing reports on whether or not they actually complied. In an interview with Dr. Martha Jones in our book To the Front, she makes a really great point that to focus on these exclusions is to miss all of the ways that black women were self-organizing outside of the white organizations that are better known. She also notes that while white suffragists were organizing around just one cause, their right to vote, black women suffragists were often engaged in many forms of general racial uplift that would benefit all of society. So we find them in all manner of places, in churches, in social clubs, and so on, advocating for women's right to vote as part of a larger platform. Jean Thompson, another To the Front contributor, writes about Baltimore's own colored or progressive women's suffrage club, founded in 1915 by Estelle Young. One of my favorite anecdotes about this club is that two of its members, who were also members of the literary society, the Du Bois Circle, were next-door neighbors on Druid Hill Avenue, and they often held meetings in one another's homes. These small facts help to give texture to these women's lives and show how integrated their social uplift work was to their daily lives. It also makes me reflect on how I engage with my own neighbors and how important and accessible local organizing can be. Once women had the right to vote, Augusta Giselle, who was a club officer and one of those two women who lived on Druid Hill Avenue, wrote a regular column in the Afro educating women on how to use their newly won right. They had won the right to vote in August and would use it just a couple months later in the presidential election of 1920. But before the 19th Amendment was passed, there was hearty debate in Congress. The Afro ran a story in 1918 that outlined some of the racist tactics that Southern senators openly debated on the Senate floor. In this article, a senator from Georgia is quoted as saying, "The amendment which I have offered is a very simple one. It merely inserts the word white before the word person and thus gives white women the suffrage, leaving any state that chooses to extend it to Negro women or not so to extend it, whichever may be to its best and highest interest. If so amended, it would secure white supremacy and the supremacy of the white man's civilization and his social institutions for all time to come, because the white women could vote under it and the other women could not unless the people of a given state decreed that they could." He goes on to say that it wouldn't just do the trick for black women, but would also exclude Chinese and Japanese Americans as well. Senator Ransdell of Louisiana said, "Some of our Southern friends insist that there is grave danger in giving Negro women the right to vote, and for that reason they oppose the federal amendment, while willing for women to vote under state laws. I cannot believe there is such a menace from this source as warrants the whole nation in refusing to adopt the suffrage amendment to the federal Constitution. In my judgment, the situation as to Negro women can be handled as has been done with Negro men for the past 25 years. Of course, what the Louisiana senator is referring to is the systematic denial of black men's rights to vote throughout the South in particular, through poll taxes, literary tests, and outright intimidation and terror. Having perfected these methods of voter suppression against black men, he foresees no issue in doing the same for black women and is therefore not opposed to the women's suffrage amendment. And so the suffrage amendment eventually passes in 1919 and is ratified in 1920. And while women in Maryland have pretty straightforward access to the ballot that year and in the years that follow, in many states further south, a renewed fight begins as black women are met with the same obstruction tactics that had been perfected on black men after the ratification of the 15th Amendment 50 years prior. Black people would not have real equal access to the vote until 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. But even that wasn't the end of voter suppression. This is an ongoing, multifaceted fight, and the tactics in 2020 are as wild as ever. So if you're not planning to vote in person in November, it's imperative that you sign up for mail-in voting as early as possible and send in your vote as soon as you're able, because the stakes have never been higher.
This country should make monuments of brown hands for the melanin that has molded America into itself, picked it from ensuing decline like cotton from root and stem, bales bailed this nation from breakdown. Bulging eyes and twisted mouths were given in return, and the spangled banner yet waves. July smiles at independence, as the Constitution restricted citizens. In the same breath, a smile becomes a bite. Civil rights swallowed, ground in the teeth of a government groomed to crush color into submission. Land of the free, home of the brave, omitted rights to the children of Africa made slaves. But today, in the wake of decades of tears and graves, we mark the 150th anniversary of men made more than 3/5, amended into human enough to elect. 1870 gifted ballots to the same black hands beat by bullwhips while women were still relegated to silence. But this be a centennial celebration too, of warrior wombs that waded through discrimination to ratify themselves into Amendment 19, to be seen and counted, despite the patriarchy that rejected them in the first place. But for us, existing as both black and female, no such victory prevailed. We were not entitled to the empowerment of women who were too biased to fight for anything other than pale progress, beating black sisters back from polls, creating loopholes to choke the vote out of our very throats. And even with the law on their side, black brothers were still obstructed. So we, a people of picket signs, protest, and song, took to Alabama. Peaceful in assemblage, still met with brutal violence, from the murder of Jimmy Lee to the horrors of Bloody Sunday. And still, local authorities and vigilantes couldn't diminish the determination buried deep in the souls of our people, willing to walk 54 miles without ceasing. This was the journey to the Voting Rights Act. Blacks suffered through suffrage, sacrificed, and soldiered to overcome, but the battle still isn't won. Because democracy don't apply to the marginalized, those that lie beneath the weight of oppression, ignored by those elected, subjected to racist policies, abused and unprotected, those disenfranchised with barriers behind bars, the mass incarcerated, slated for sentences that question their lives point blank, period, or those returned and free yet carrying the scarlet letter of felon as presidents work to repeal what has been legislated, dismantling safeguards that regulated the power to vet states who historically discriminated before their rules could be enacted. This type of rollback would impact the very foundation of what was built by the strategies of activists in the 60s. So we must push on. Politics be local, so we gotta take back our cities. Support those that don't feed into the greed and the notoriety, but rather those who stand tall in the face of accountability. We must elect with greater scrutiny and educate future generations, because what is government worth if we're just voting blindly, asking young folks to participate in the political system that don't reflect them? Representation matters, and integrity does too. So gone are the days of voting just because it once was a thing we couldn't do. What would it look like if every resident was fully present and actually participated in political processes? When that day comes, I guess we can call it true democracy. Thank you.
My name is Faith Cooper.
My name is Jason Murphy.
My name is Stephanie Williams.
My name is Angela Cooper Jr.
I'm 18 years old.
I'm 19 years old.
I'm 17 years old.
I'm 16 years old.
When I'm able to vote, I want my vote to regulate gun laws.
I want my vote to represent equal representation for people who look like me.
I want my vote to bring a new administration into the White House.
If I could vote, I want my vote to put people in power who would undo a lot of the laws that keep systemic racism present in America, such as redlining and other things of that nature.
I feel I am something of a novice upon this platform. Born of a race whose inheritance has been outrage and wrong, most of my life had been spent in battling against those wrongs. But I did not feel as keenly as others that I had these rights in common with other women, which are now demanded. About 2 years ago, I stood within the shadows of my home. A great sorrow had fallen upon my life. My husband had died suddenly, leaving me a widow with 4 children, one my own, and the others stepchildren. I tried to keep my children together. But my husband died in debt, and before he had been in his grave 3 months, the administrator had swept the very milk crocks and wash tubs from my hands. I was a farmer's wife and made butter for the Columbus market, but what could I do when they had swept all away? Well, they left me one thing, and that was a looking glass. Had I died instead of my husband, how different would have been the result. By this time, he would have had another wife, it is likely, and no administrator would have gone into his house, broken up his home, and sold his bed, and taken away his means of support. I took my children in my arms and went out to seek my living. While I was gone, a neighbor to whom I had once lent $5 went before a magistrate and swore that he believed I was a non-resident and laid an attachment on my very bed. And I went back to Ohio with my orphan children in my arms, without a single feather bed in this wide world that was not in the custody of the law. I say then that justice is not fulfilled so long as woman is unequal before the law. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. You tried that in the case of the Negro. You pressed him down for 2 centuries, and in doing so, you crippled the moral strength and paralyzed the spiritual energies of the white men of the country. When the hands of the Black were fettered, white men were deprived of the liberty of speech and the freedom of the press. Society cannot afford to neglect the enlightenment of any class of its members. At the South, the legislation of the country was in behalf of the rich slaveholders, while the poor white man was neglected. What is the consequence today? From that very class of neglected poor men comes the man who stands today with his hand upon the helm of the nation. He fails to catch the watchword of the hour and throws himself, the incarnation of meanness, across the pathway of the nation. My objection to Andrew Johnson is not that he has been a poor white man. My objection is that he keeps poor wits all the way through. That is the trouble with him. This grand and glorious revolution which has commenced will fail to reach its climax of success until throughout the length and breadth of the American Republic, the nation shall be so colorblind as to know no man by the color of his skin or the curl of his hair. It will then have no privileged class trampling upon and outraging the underprivileged classes, but will then be one great privileged nation whose privilege will be to produce the loftiest manhood and womanhood that humanity can attain. I do not believe that giving the woman the ballot is immediately going to cure all the ills of life. I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. I think that, like men, they may be divided into 3 classes: the good, the bad, the indifferent. The good would vote according to their convictions and principles. The bad, as dictated by prejudice or malice. And the indifferent will vote on the strongest side of the question with the winning party. You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs. I, as a colored woman, have had in this country an education which has made me feel as if I were in the situation of Ishmael, my hand against every man and every man's hand against me. Let me go tomorrow morning and take my seat in one of your streetcars. I do not know that they will do it in New York, but they will in Philadelphia, and the conductor will put up his hand and stop the car rather than let me ride. Going from Washington to Baltimore this spring, they put me in the smoking car. Aye, in the capital of the nation, where the Black man consecrated himself to the nation's defense, faithful when the white man was faithless, they put me in the smoking car. They did it once. But the next time they tried it, they failed, for I would not go in. I felt the fight in me, but I do not want to have to fight all the time. Today, I am puzzled where to make my home. I would like to make it in Philadelphia, near my own friends and relations. But if I want to ride in the streets of Philadelphia, they send me to ride on the platform with the driver. Have women nothing to do with this? Not long since, a colored woman took her seat in an 11th Street car in Philadelphia, and the conductor stopped the car and told the rest of the passengers to get out, and left the car with her in it alone when they took it back to the station. One day, I took my seat in the car, and the conductor came to me and told me to take another seat. I just screamed, "Murder!" The man said if I was black, I ought to behave myself. I knew that if he was white, he was not behaving himself. Are there no wrongs to be righted? In advocating the cause of the colored man, since the Dred Scott decision, I have sometimes said I thought the nation had touched bottom. But let me tell you, there is a depth of infamy lower than that. It is when the nation, standing upon the threshold of a great peril, reached out its hands to a feebler race and asked that race to help it. And when the peril was over, said, "You are good enough for soldiers, but not good enough for citizens." We have a woman in our country who has received the name of Moses, not by lying about it, but by acting it out. A woman who has gone down into the Egypt of slavery and brought out hundreds of our people into liberty. The last time I saw that woman, her hands were swollen. That woman who had led one of Montgomery's most successful expeditions, who was brave enough and secretive enough to act as a scout for the American army, had her hands all swollen from a conflict with a brutal conductor who undertook to eject her from her place. That woman whose courage and bravery won a recognition from our army and from every black man in the land is excluded from every thoroughfare of travel. Talk of giving women the ballot box? Go on. It is a normal school, and the white women of this country need it. While there exists this brutal element in society which tramples upon the feeble and treads down the weak, I tell you that if there is any class of people who need to be lifted out of their airy nothings and selfishness, it is the white woman in America.
Woman, I am born. What does woman mean? Must my dreams face scorn? If I long for fire, must it stay unreal? Can I not desire? Am I not to feel? If I ache to taste, am I not to try? If my heart says sail, why should I deny? I have made dreams, I have made plans, I see horizons wide as a man's. Must I be nothing till I'm some man's wife? Look at this face, does it deceive? Do I look made to milk and to weave? I would be damned to hell if that is my life. I'm almost your age. I'm your match in size. I'm as skilled with swords
Yo quise ser como los hombres quisieron que yo fuese. Un intento de vida. Un juego al escondite con mi ser. Pero yo estaba hecha de presentes y mis pies planos sobre la tierra promisoria no resistían caminar hacia atrás y seguían adelante, adelante, burlando las cenizas para alcanzar el beso de los senderos nuevos. A cada paso, adelantado en mi ruta hacia el frente, rasgaba mis espaldas el aleteo desesperado de los troncos viejos. Pero la rama estaba desprendida para siempre. Y a cada nuevo azote, la mirada mía se separaba más y más y más de los lejanos horizontes aprendidos. Y mi rostro iba tomando la expresión que le venía de adentro, la expresión definida que asomaba un sentimiento de liberación íntima, un sentimiento que surgía del equilibrio sostenido entre mi vida y la verdad del beso de los senderos nuevos. Ya, definido mi rumbo en el presente, me sentí brote de todos los suelos de la tierra, de los suelos sin historia, de los suelos sin porvenir, del suelo siempre suelo sin orillas, de todos los hombres y de todas las épocas. Y fui toda en mí como fue en mí la vida. Yo quise ser como los hombres quisieron que yo fuese. Un intento de vida. Un juego al escondite con mi ser. Pero yo estaba hecha de presentes. Cuando ya los heraldos me anunciaban en el regio desfile de los troncos viejos, se me torció el deseo de seguir a los hombres y el homenaje se quedó esperándome.
Hi, my name is Chayla Stanton.
Hi, I'm Jordan Minardi.
Hi, my name is Valeria Morales.
I'm 19 years old.
I'm 18 years old.
And I am 15 years old.
I want my vote to defund the police department.
To commemorate the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which granted women's suffrage, I cast my vote for young women who cannot afford higher degrees, who continue to be the backbone of industry in this country.
Defunding the police department would make it so that things like rehabilitation centers and school systems get more money.
Who may not be the next female CEO, but whose work is just as important to demonstrate that women, the mothers of our nation, deserve better working conditions and a living wage.
Giving more money to rehabilitation centers would make it so that people who go to jail for crimes like drug or alcohol abuse can then instead go to rehabilitation centers.
If I could vote, I would want my vote to count for someone who will fight for equality, freedom and justice of all people, and the protection of every person's basic human rights.
Giving more money to school systems will make it so that teachers aren't getting laid off because there isn't enough money in the budget.
Regardless of who they are, where they come from, the color of their skin, who they love, or what they believe in.
I have personally witnessed amazing teachers get laid off because they couldn't get paid.
I would want my vote to silence ongoing hatred and reflect my core values of being compassionate, accepting, and empathetic, but overall, spreading love.
That is what I want my vote to do. Thank you.
What will you do for me when I have used my limbs in service of your vote? What will you do for me the day after, and the day after, and the day after that, and the days after that, and the days after those days, and the days after them, and now what? What will you do for me now? You expect for me to write a love ballad to the system, sing a song of freedom that ain't ever come, rewriting memory until all we have is forget, while this country forgets riots and repeats, forgets riots and repeats, forgets riots and repeats, forgets riots and repeat, dancing to the beat of white guilt that still centers the illusion of who you think you are. A country that seems to forget but never seems to regret, because reparations seem inconvenient to the myth of white benevolence. A broken record on an axis that has spun away from so many dreams. And I tell you that I cannot. I cannot praise it. I cannot love a lover who does not love me. I cannot celebrate it for my engagement with it has always been one at the threat of extinction. So, you tell me, what will you do for me when the sun has risen on the day after? What will you do for me when all of this is done? Tell me. What will you do for me when what I am demanding of you is to do more than put bodies on ballots, to love me beyond our common enemy, to understand that I am beyond your desire for yourself? What will you do for me the day after? Tell me. Go, vote, now. Time is of the essence. Go, do it now. Vote. Time is of the essence. Go now. Vote now. Time is of the essence. Yes, but watch. What happens after I try to scoop my tears back into my eyes, using my hands that tremble with fear, hands that can't hold them, hands that cling together, praying that maybe this time you will love me beyond what I can do for you? What can you do for me beyond thinking of yourself? Yes, there, go, vote. Yes, now. Fear is the only thing that the country has given some of us. An umbilical cord around the throats of a new nation. Terrorism, its doctrine. Genocide, its delivery room. Violence threatening to hang them at any time. I wail, lament, crying for freedom, crying beyond it to liberation, to sever the shackles of oppression. There are bodies on ballots, limbs, lips, hips, wombs, tears, black bodies, indigenous bodies, women bodies on these paper tariffs, blood spilling like ink from trees, seeping into the streets, flames sticky with memory while the country attempts to forget. If I join you in voting, will you join me in this fight? If I join you in voting, will you still know there is more to do, or will you think you've done enough? If I join you in voting, how will you love me beyond a ballot that is cast to save yourself? Will you demand oppression die? Will you demand white supremacy cease? Will you demand a better world beyond systems and commemorative gestures? Voting is harm reduction, that's what you say. Voting is harm reduction, that's what you tell me. Voting is harm reduction, forgets riots and repeats. Will you join me in ending white supremacy and dancing and offering up thanksgiving to black gods on racism's grave? Imperialism won't save us. Or will you, after I have cast my vote, cast me out? If you have learned your lesson, then let us walk to the ballot box together. But do not be angry if your betrayal causes me to burn this all into ceasing to be. What is your commitment to me beyond the commitment to yourself? Will you still tell me my voice matters when the vote is done? And the police beat the bodies of my people, and the government tells us crumbs are better than feast, when the laments of our mothers and wails of our fathers are called radical and too inconvenient to honor, when war pays no heed to civility and wields the sword of violence and greed, when black trans bodies lay discarded in streets and the blood of our siblings scream against our tormentors. Will it tell me, will you think what I want is worthy of your attention then? Will my vote still matter when I cry freedom? When I rage against rape, when I desire to pull down the illusion of democracy and raise up the truth of liberation? Will it? Will it matter when I call your white families into account and demand you leave them to rot? There are bodies on ballots. Yes, there, go, vote, now, forgets, riots, repeats, voting as harm reduction. That's what you tell me. But tell me, will you love me the day after? Or will you be angry with me when I remind you just what you said? You call me righteous as I demand we get rid of a tyrant. So I must ask, what will you do for me when my tears have not dried? And I am still weeping because the tyrant is also you.
When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century,
Let them say that it was your generation
who laid down the heavy burden of hate at last.
and that peace finally triumphs over violence, aggression, and war.
So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters.
and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.